All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're looking at a pretty wild idea, one that suggests we need a complete Copernican revolution for, of all things, history itself.
So let me ask you something. What if the timeline of history you learned in school, the one we all take for granted, is actually built on a foundation that's, well, kind of stuck in the Middle Ages? I mean, what if our super modern scientific view of the world is propped up by a history created in an age of faith, of mysticism, not facts? Okay, to really get this, we've got to talk about what's being called a pre-Copernican history. And what that really means is we need to understand the mindset of the people who first wrote down the story of the ancient world and the Middle Ages. You see, the folks who first wrote our history, they just didn't think like we do, at all. Their entire universe was built around the idea of a divine plan. They saw a deep meaning in everything: numerology, ideal geometric shapes. It wasn't about recording objective facts. No. Their goal was to show how the sacred divine order was unfolding. And a perfect way to picture this is with that old Ptolemaic model of the universe, right? The one with the Earth smack in the middle. Now, even back then, astronomers could see that the planets kind of wobbled. Their paths weren't perfect circles, but the circle was considered the divine, perfect shape. So they built this incredibly complicated model just to defend that ideal, even when messy reality was screaming that it wasn't right.
And get this, they did the exact same thing with geography. You look at these old medieval maps, these mappa mundi, and what's right at the geometric center of the entire world? Jerusalem. Now, is that geographically accurate? Not even close. But for a worldview built on a theological ideal, it made perfect sense. You just bend reality to fit the story you want to tell. And you have to understand, this wasn't some mistake. This was their job. The historians back then saw themselves as revealing something. As the scholar H.W. Goetz points out, they weren't just jotting down what happened. They were searching for a pre-given, a divine order. For them, history was just the proof of God's grand plan playing out. Okay, so if our historical foundation is built on this idealized, faith-based model, what happens when we start finding cracks in it? Big cracks. And that brings us to the next kind of shocking part, the forgery epidemic. And I mean, the scale of this problem is just staggering. We're not talking about a few fakes here and there. Take the Merovingian period, that's roughly the 6th to 8th centuries. Today, we know that two-thirds of all the royal charters from that time are forgeries. The majority of the so-called evidence is just made up. Seriously, just let that sink in for a second. And it gets worse. A legal historian, H.T. Faustner, flat out says that for the time before 1122, almost all, as in nearly every single one, of the royal charters we use as sources are forgeries. Think about what that means. The proof for huge chunks of our history is built on a house of cards, on documents that were faked. So this leads to a massive problem with how we even do history, right? The traditional method is basically innocent until proven guilty. You assume a document is real unless you can prove, beyond a doubt, that it's a fake. But if you know that most of the documents from a certain time are probably fakes, does that old approach even make sense anymore? Is it really the safest way to go? A classic case of this is the donation of Constantine. The story goes that way back in the 4th century, Emperor Constantine handed over the keys to the Western Roman Empire to the Pope. This document was a huge deal. It was used for centuries to justify the Pope's power. They even painted frescoes about it. The only problem? It was a total fabrication, a fake, probably cooked up in the 8th century. It wasn't until 1440 that it was officially debunked. So for more than 600 years, a cornerstone of European political history was based on a complete and utter lie.
All right, so this whole forgery mess, it forces us to make a really, really important distinction. And honestly, this is the absolute core of the whole idea we're talking about today. It's the difference between history and the past. Okay, so let's break this down because it's crucial. On one side, you have the past. That's what actually happened, the real events. It's fixed, it is what it is. Then on the other side, you have history. And history, well, that's just the story we tell ourselves about the past. It's our narrative, it's our interpretation, it's a model we've built. The Germans actually have different words for this, which is handy. Vergangenheit is the past, what happened. Geschichte is history, the story we tell. One of the proponents of this idea, Eugene Gabowicz, said it perfectly. The past, it can't be false, it can only be unknown. But history, our story about the past, oh yeah, that can totally be false. It can be badly told, it can be straight up invented, it can be a myth. So what does this all mean? It means we need to start thinking of history as a model. Just like that old model of the universe with the Earth in the center. It's not reality itself, it's just an approximation. And like any model, it can be tested. It can have bugs, it can be incomplete, it can be just plain wrong. The story in your textbook is not the past. So if history is a model that can be tested, then how do we test it? How do we find the bugs? Well, that brings us to the really fun part. The proposal is that we need to start thinking like a hack. Now, I know, hacking history sounds a little out there, maybe even chaotic, but there's a serious idea behind it from the philosophy of science. A guy named Paul Feyerabend famously said that when it comes to big breakthroughs, sometimes anything goes. Think about Galileo. To get everyone to accept that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, he had to break the old rules, use new tools. He had to challenge the entire system. So what does thinking like a history hacker actually involve? It's really about using what's called computational thinking. It means you stop looking at historical texts just as stories and start looking at them as data. You're searching for patterns. You're pulling out the most important details and ignoring the noise. You're breaking these huge, complex narratives down into smaller, manageable chunks. And then you try to build new models to see if they hold up. So what's in this new toolkit? It's actually pretty cool. It's stuff like statistical analysis to find weird, improbable repetitions in historical accounts. You know, stories that seem to happen over and over again. It's structural analysis, looking at lists of kings or dynasties to see if they look a little too perfect, almost like they were generated by an algorithm. They're even using things like differential calculus to double-check ancient astronomical reports to see if the sky actually looked the way the texts claim it did on a certain date. It's a whole new way of putting our historical sources under a microscope. And all of this leaves us with one final, really provocative question. If our version of history, the one we all learned, is just one possible model of the past, and if that model was built on a pre-scientific worldview, and we know for a fact it's packed with forgeries, then are we ready to do what Copernicus did for the stars? Are we ready to build a new one?